Hi, I'm Mike Krause from the Independence Institute, filling in for your regular host, John Caldera. Listen, folks, please stick around because a little later in the show, we're going to be talking with some political reporters about the upcoming Colorado legislative session. But first, we're going to talk about actually moving people out of poverty. And with us to talk about this guy who knows a thing or two about it, Jason Janz. You run an outfit called Upstream Impact. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
All right. You want to give us a quick and dirty? What's your elevator pitch for Upstream Impact if you're pitching some guy?
We are a 12-month career and community development program that takes families in Northeast Denver and moves them from generational poverty to the middle class.
All right. That's really interesting because we're going to get back to that, the Northeast Denver part. But first, and also with this, Darin Valdez, a graduate of Upstream Impact. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Other interesting thing, you actually work on the crew here at Channel 12.
I do.
So you produce this TV show.
Yeah.
And you're the one that told me about Upstream Impact, and so we wanted to definitely do the show because you are a graduate.
Yeah.
And you weren't always a television production expert making a guy like John Caldera look good, right? There's a story behind it. But first, interesting. There's a lot of organizations, groups, government agencies, religious outfits working to provide what you call relief to people either homeless, in poverty, in crisis, drug and alcohol addicted. Name your poison, right? But what you're talking about is a little bit different. This isn't just trying to make someone's situation a little less uncomfortable while you're trying to figure out what the hell to do about it, right? You've actually taken a place, Northeast Denver, and set a goal, and your website says 1,000 people out of poverty. Talk about that. What's different about that than the standard relief? Let's provide food, maybe provide some shelter, et cetera.
There's a couple concepts there. One is relief versus what I call development. Relief is what you need when a tsunami comes through and people are just hungry and the houses are blown over and you gotta kind of like get immediate help or people are gonna perish. That's relief work. And that's necessary in tsunami kind of situations. The American poverty problem is not a tsunami situation. It needs a development solution. So people by and large in our country can get food and shelter at different places. They need now to get out of poverty and become self-sufficient. That's a development approach. So I think 99% of nonprofits ask the question, how do we help people in poverty?
Right.
And we want to ask the question, how do we get people out of poverty? So that's a different question. Then when it comes to what I would say is an idea of place, is like rather than saying we're going to save the world, saying we're going to take one neighborhood and go super deep and plant deep roots. All of our program staff lives in Northeast Denver, and we're going to get to know poverty from the ground level up. They're our own very own neighbors. And then how do we take that place and actually try to see some sunshine there around people actually becoming self-sufficient and really creating wealth. That's what we're about. We're creating wealth and opportunity in the American dream for people that have struggled with where the access points are.
I'd like to talk about this, and we can get this with you in just a little bit, Darin, but there's more to it than you can get someone a job. You can get someone work. And in fact, as you said, if you can't find work in Denver at the moment, you ain't trying very hard.
Yeah, you
right?
don't want to work.
You don't want to work. And it's not terribly expensive to feed someone. Lots of places do that. And you can warehouse them in a homeless facility.
Homeless people can get breakfast, lunch, and dinner at 7 different places for free in Denver every single day. We don't need any more food down here.
But we're not necessarily, but that's not what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. We're talking about moving people out of poverty and keeping them, and then staying out of poverty, yes. Right? Which would mean that there's a lot of patterns, behaviors, history that has to be broken, interrupted, and you have to learn kind of a new way to think and live, which is another element that goes beyond relief.
Yeah, we call it the poverty mindset.
Right.
And we can, there's two sides of the debate of whether people in poverty make bad choices or bad choices cause poverty. I don't want to get into that discussion. We at least say, hey, people are here for a variety of reasons, and they face certain obstacles to get out. But the mindset is the hardest to change. And a lot of it is just not knowing how to think a different way. So we're trying to provide that pathway out. And usually through what we call bridging social capital. So every family in poverty is matched with somebody in the middle to wealth class, and they meet together for dinner every week for a year to help create this social capital and bridge it.
All right, let's talk about this boots on the ground, because before you became a television professional, you were on the streets.
Yeah, I was.
Right?
Yeah.
And
homeless.
Yeah. Drug addict?
Yep.
And so what was the processes, the behaviors, the patterns that had to be broken for you to get where you're sitting today. I mean, this couldn't have been easy because it would be one thing to get you a job at Channel 12,
yeah.
but so what if you don't know how to keep that job?
Yeah.
And it's another thing to give you a paycheck, but so what if you don't know how to handle that money, right?
Yeah. But the biggest problem was, so 3 years and 3 days ago, I was living on the streets. I was addicted to meth, and I had, for about 7 years, been living on the streets. I got lucky, and my family helped me get into treatment. And about 6 months in to treatment, I was sober, but I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was 40 years old, and there's not many opportunities for someone like that. And I was working at a place called the Same Cafe, and I saw a flyer for Upstream, and the Gamble Foundation was one of our most amazing donors. He helped start the whole program. And it said to write an essay about why I deserved a scholarship. And so I wrote them, and I told them everything. I just laid everything out on the table, and I said, this is me, and this is what I'm trying to do. And they took my essay, and they invited me in for interviews, and many interviews. And they wanted to see if I had grit, if I had determination, if I really wanted to change my life. And when they finally gave me the scholarship, it was amazing. It was like God was smiling on me, So I stuck with them, and they supported me, and they helped me to pay for school at Emily Griffiths. I went into the video production program there because it sounded just awesome. And all throughout school, they kept giving me encouragement. We'd meet every week, see how I'm doing with school, how I'm doing with different problems. And whenever I got afraid, because a lot of people, when they try something new, they get really scared. They just got me to keep going. And so every week, Jason was my ally, and I'd report to him, and we work on how we're doing at school, putting different goals together. I wanted to get a job in TV, and so when I graduated Emily Griffiths, we got it set up that I came to interview here at Channel 12, and they gave me the job here. After that, just meeting on budgets and what other goals I wanted to achieve in life, and then seeing my progress on each of those things. I mean, we had to save receipts from everything we spent, and we had to put that on paper.
So you basically need to be check-in and you need to be held accountable.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into this idea of there's a ton of dough being spent on, and I'm going to use the broad term homelessness, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of dough gets spent on this in Denver. In fact, one of the numbers thrown around is $60,000 per homeless person, but very few poor people are. I mean, the homeless are a tiny fraction of actually the poor, right?
Yeah, there's 350,000 people in Denver that would classify as living in poverty. We only have 10,000 homeless in Denver, but they seem to get a lot of the press, a lot of the attention, a lot of the dough. Denver Road Home, their own stat says that the city spends about $40,000 per year. If you take the homeless providers, the nonprofit service providers, it's another $20,000 per homeless person per year. So that's where the 60,000 number comes from.
That's a ton of dough. People raise families on that kind of money, right? And own homes and go to work. Here's the problem we run into, right? So you walk around Denver, the Denver metro area. Everywhere you go, there's a guy in a backpack on a corner with a sign, got some kind of story on it, right? And this is what everybody who doesn't work in this industry sees. They're not seeing, and I call that the scene. And a good friend of the Independence Institute, Bob Cote, who passed away recently, who used to run Step 13, which deals with only in men with drug and alcohol addictions, used to tell these amazing stories about not just the homeless industry that revolves around all these people, but also the culture within it, where all these people have been on that same corner for a decade, and that's their corner. So this is what everybody sees, but this is not the problem, right? I mean, there's a huge population of the unseen.
Yeah, the hidden homeless.
Hidden homeless. And so what does that look like? What would the hidden homeless look like? What's your day-to-day life like?
I think I want to say to your viewers that the homeless, every homeless person in Denver has an avenue through different programs to become self-sufficient.
Right.
So when you see that person on the corner, there are programs that will help them. The 98% that are hidden, because a single mom's not going to sit there and fly that sign on that corner with her 2 kids, right? She's going to couch surf, right? She's going to try to take her kids to school on the bus, have to get up at 6 a.m., right? And then go to some minimum wage job. But she's not going to be able to get her own place in Denver on a minimum wage job, 40 hours a week with 2 kids. And she's exhausted, right? So We're trying to find those people and say, let's give them a shot. And what he talked about in the interview process is we're vetting our applicants. We only take 8% of our applicants because, we're looking for, are they motivated? And do they have the capacity to make the change in their life at this time and will do the work necessary to become self-sufficient? And we do a class every 3 months, so people can always come back in the door, but we've become pretty good at finding out who's really ready to make a change because we can't help everybody. But then we invest serious financial and staff time and volunteer time into that person to get them self-sufficient. Because Darin, and we call him a leader, because he's leading his own change. We're just the scaffolding around it. He's the rock star. He did it. He went to school. He graduated. I went to his graduation. He got the job here. He bought a car with his own cash. Yeah. You know, it wasn't through some charity nonprofit. He paid for his own car. That's the height of dignity, I think.
Yeah. We're talking about this is not inexpensive because it's cheap to feed someone. It's cheap to house people in a warehouse type environment. You're talking about like tuition at Emily Griffith, and you're talking about moving someone into their own apartment in their own car. Now we're talking about instead of spending a lot of money on a lot of people, you're spending a fair amount of money on a very few people, right?
Yeah, and I tell people, depending on the needs and the cost of the program, we spend about $20,000 to $30,000 per program participant per leader. And sometimes people stagger at that because they'd rather give the $1.50 to feed someone on Thanksgiving and save their life, all that kind of glossy nonsense. Where I say, hey, you sent your kid to college. That's a human development program. You spent $30K per year. You spent $120K for your kid to go to school, and they can't even do anything with a degree, right? Yeah. It doesn't prove anything. For 1 year at college, we can actually get somebody a self-sufficient wage off of all government subsidies and living a life of dignity. And we think that's a great investment.
But that's still less money than all of the government and relief programs, for lack of a better term, spend on one homeless guy in a year.
$60,000 a year to maintain homelessness.
To maintain somebody in a state of homelessness for the most part, but to try and make it less awful than it really is.
Now, I will admit that there is a percentage that's mentally ill that will never probably be able to work a 40-hour-week job and all that kind of stuff. And I think society has an obligation to care for those people. But there are plenty of people who have the they have the capacity to work a full-time job.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between your old life and your new life? I mean, tell me, if you had to pick one thing and say, what is it that you wake up every morning and go, wow?
You know what is the most amazing thing about me now is I don't think there's anything out there that I can't do. I mean, I've learned that with support from a group of people, a family, that sees how you're doing, there's no ceiling to anything you want to do. I mean, all you have to do is set up the goals and knock them down. And my whole life, I kept thinking about it. I wasn't a success. I was never going to be a success, but I never learned how to just set up small little goals and keep achieving them. And before you know it, I mean, I have 2 careers now. I mean, I work here at Channel 12, and I just finished my first year of school for addictions counselor. I have a full-time job there. I have my own apartment, and all of this I've done myself. I mean, they help me pay for school, and they support me with encouragement and help me to find my way around, different barriers. But pretty much they've made me self-sustaining. I can do it on my own.
I just want to make a point too that you mentioned fear earlier, and he just mentioned family. Yep. There's no government program that can allay his fears and provide family. Our community, the way we're focused on Northeast Denver, is our community has come together and say, we can solve our own problems. We are competent, and we are resourced, and we love each other. So if you, and Darin has become kind of a rock star in the program, because if you come on Wednesday night to our family dinners where you have 80 individuals who are just trying to get, leaders who are trying to get out of poverty, and 80 of their mentors and allies and staff, it's a huge buzz. Mm-hmm. But he's an inspiration to a lot of people, right? Because I can't change the world's problems, but Darin can now stand up and say it can happen. Well, when Darin says it versus me saying it, it carries a lot more weight.
And that's the biggest part is when I go back and I speak to the new classes, all I do is tell my story, and they start crying because they know exactly where I've been, and they know they can do it now. I mean, they have hope, and that's what we're doing.
Fantastic. Hope. Sounds really good. We are out of time, gentlemen. Jason, thanks so much for coming on. Darin, you got to get back to work. Stick around.